The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Daniel Truckenbrough and I'm a marketing assistant at Brooks Publishing, and I'm very happy to have Dathan Rush and M'Lisa Shelden here with us today to discuss coaching in early care settings. Before the webinar starts, I just have a few things to go over. First and foremost, just a few tips for today's webinar. If you have any applications open, such as email or web browsers, if you can go ahead and close those devices, that'll help increase bandwidth for watching the webinar today. If you have any questions during the webinar, there is a questions tab in the webinar panel, and you can enter your questions there, and then we'll take those towards the end of the webinar during our Q&A. And if you'd like to minimize your webinar panel, there is a little orange arrow at the upper left-hand side of the panel, and if you click that, that'll minimize the panel, and then you can click it again to expand. And if you have any audio issues during the webinar, you can first make sure that your correct audio outlet is selected in the audio tab, and make sure your speakers are turned up. And then if you still can't get your audio to work, you can switch to the phone call option in the audio tab, and it'll give you instructions for dialing in using your phone. And you can also try exiting out of the webinar and joining back in, but we are probably going to reach capacity, so if you exit out, you may not be able to join back in. So I'd suggest using your phone option first. And also, I'd like to cover a few other things before we start. Dathan, if you could go to the next slide. So Dathan and M'Lisa are authors of the Early Childhood Coaching Handbook, second edition. In this new edition, professionals will get practical tools to help conduct skillful coaching in homes, schools, and communities. And you can find more information about their book here at this URL on your screen. We are also offering a giveaway for this webinar. Dathan, could you go to the next slide? Oh, there we go. So we're offering a giveaway of 3 copies of Dathan and M'Lisa's book, the Early Childhood Coaching Handbook, second edition. So 3 attendees will be selected at random, and we will send emails to those attendees after the webinar. And so if you submit questions throughout the webinar, that can increase your chances of being selected. And then at the end of this webinar, we also have a survey that we are asking attendees to complete. So at the end, you'll be prompted to complete a short survey, and you can just let us know what you thought about this webinar. And you'll also be entered to win a free copy of the Early Childhood Coaching Handbook, second edition. And then one last thing, there are certificates available for this webinar. I'll cover that a little bit more in detail towards the end of the webinar, but just a heads up that certificates are available for all viewers. And so with that, I will turn it over to Dathan and M'Lisa for their presentation on coaching in early care settings.
Thank you, Daniel. We appreciate all your support, and welcome everyone. We're excited to be here with you today. We were joking a little bit. We were like, wow, some people are going to actually get to eat lunch today because they'll come to the webinar and have a snack, because we know how busy most of you are. So thanks again for taking time out. Our purpose today is we actually just want to get down to the basics, or the framework for coaching, and then make sure that we have time at the end to answer your questions. So as we go along, we're going to point out to you, for those of you who might have had the first edition of the coaching book and are pondering whether or not it's worth it to get the second edition, we'll certainly share some information with you about that. But the focus today, we wanted you to be thinking about, who is it that you're coaching? And for those of you who are coaching families, we hope you've already taken a look, but if you haven't, that chapter 7, we added a lot of scenarios about coaching families and coaching families who have children with a variety of different conditions and abilities. For those of you who primarily coach teachers, Chapter 8, we did the same thing. We added additional scenarios. And then for those of you who are service coordinators, we hope you've seen the brand new Chapter 6, because we didn't have that in the first edition. So having in mind who it is that you are providing help and support to, we thought would make this double check for you. If you're really new to coaching, you're getting the basics, but if you're an old hat at it, it'll be a good reminder for reflection about how you know if what you're doing is matching. So we know from research how we provide help is even more important sometimes than what help it actually is that we're providing. And in learning about help getting ourselves and in reading the research and then thinking about how that applied to our work, we shared a lot of this information in Chapter 3 about effective coaches. But what we know about help giving is there are two components to help giving. There's the relational side, which is probably the most commonly thought about, how we are as a coach. And you're right. If you demonstrate these characteristics, then you are more likely to be effective. But one of the sides of help giving causes a lot of us to think about how effective we are, and it's called participatory help giving. And participatory help giving is that aspect of help giving that really pushes us to support the people that we're coaching in taking control of or accountability for what it is they want to have happen. And so you can see these are really common aspects of early childhood intervention. So participating in development of their own goals, developing plans, implementing the plans, and those last steps there about looping back and evaluating how effective and thinking about what next steps need to be are critical. But that last piece, Dathan and I have talked about for many years in terms of ensuring that the people that we're coaching understand that their action is what is causing those outcomes to happen. And so we call that self-attribution. And so part of help giving, I think sometimes a lot of early childhood people want to give a lot of praise and encouragement and kind of cheerleader. And one of the things about that's really been helpful for me with coaching is that I have learned how to try to help people self-assess what they're doing well and why it's going well. So you can see here this operational definition of coaching. We have been working on that for many years, even before 2004, before we first put that out in the world, and really thinking about reflection as a part of what we're doing to help an individual that we're coaching take action and develop a plan for now. And you guys have heard this many times or read it many times, and in the future. For when we're not around, we want to support that individual's ability to do what he or she wants to do and know how effective it is. So it really takes us to this term capacity building, and really it's the bottom line for why we do coaching, so that we can have interactions with the people that we're coaching and take a look at what that support looks like and really think about what did that person learn or how is that person different because of the interactions that I've had with them, and supporting not only confidence, so skill building and being aware and knowing what to do, but also confidence that I know, and that piece. Developing confidence, as you guys know, doesn't happen because somebody tells me I can do it. It happens because I have the opportunity to try things, get feedback, get support, and then understand how that matches what I'm really wanting to have happen. And that intentionality of the way in which we do that is absolutely key.
All right. Thank you, M'Lisa. Well, building on that theme of capacity building, those of you who are familiar with the mission and key principles for providing early intervention in natural environments know that our mission and our purpose is to build upon and provide supports to assist the key adults in the child's life to know how to promote the child's learning and development throughout their everyday activities: mealtime, diaper changes, bath time, brushing teeth, watering the dog, all those activities of daily life. And so we really want to focus on the adults in the child's life because they're with them more than we ever possibly could be. So we have to really invest in those key adults. We know that the content of what we coach on in early childhood intervention is related to what we call natural learning environment practices. So that would be using real life everyday activity settings and routines as the context for our intervention and our support. We want to promote the caregiver's use of child interests, because the more the child is interested in an activity, the longer he or she will stay with it. And then we want to support the caregivers in knowing what to do to promote the child's learning. So rather than we being the ones who are working directly with the child, we want to make sure that the families and other caregivers know what to do as they're supporting the child's learning during those daily life events that they have to do: feeding the child, toileting, and so forth, as I mentioned. So then coaching provides us the strategy for building capacity. So coaching is what M'Lisa and I call our interaction style. It's the way that we interact with the adult in the child's life to build their capacity to know what to do to support the child's learning and development. Now, when M'Lisa and I first started looking into this notion of coaching, at least a couple of decades ago now, we went to the research. What did the research say you had to do if you were coaching another individual and in order to have positive outcomes from the process of coaching that individual? And what we learned from the coaching literature and from the research was that there are 5 characteristics to the practice of coaching. So there are these 5 characteristics that we apply that allow us to know that we're coaching. And the research tells us when you use these 5 characteristics in combination, then it leads to positive outcomes for the caregivers and for the child. So here, let me give you a coaching 101 kind of lesson in what these 5 characteristics are. So one we know is joint planning. And joint planning actually comes into play at the beginning of your visit and at the end of your visit. So if we have a plan at the end, and we call it a 2-part plan, if you have this 2-part plan at the end of your visit, then you're assured of having a natural starting point for your next visit. So this 2-part plan is, 1, what's going to happen between visits? So based on the things that we did today within the context of your life, so that might be a snack time because they have snack time. So based on what we did during snack time, what is it that you, the parent or caregiver, would like to do to continue that learning for your child when I'm not here? And what are other activity settings that you think you might use some of the strategies that we use today? The between visit plan. Part 2 is the next visit plan. So based on what we did today, when does it make sense for me to come back? What activity do we really need to focus back in on? And it may be snack time, it may be lunchtime because lunchtime is different than snack. It could be that they want you to come during dressing time because they want some support in knowing what to do, similar to what you did today during snack time for when it's time to get the child up and get the child dressed. So joint planning at the end of the visit. Then at the beginning of the visit, we start with that previous plan, something like this. So last time when I was here, you were going to have Josiah up in the high chair to have his meals, and you were going to help him be able to let you know what it is that he wants to eat by picking from 2 different foods. Tell me how well that's been working since the last time I was here. So you revisit the plan, let them share what worked or didn't work or what was a bit challenging. And then if you're there at that time today, you can dig deeper into that, or you can apply what was learned or you were working on in the mealtime to the activity that you and the parent had planned for today, the real life activity. Observation would be eyes on. So I want to see what it looks like, what the interaction looks like what the engagement looks like, how the caregiver is supporting the child's learning within that real life activity, which is why I go on my visit or I do my televisit at a time when that activity really occurs. There's also an opportunity for the caregiver to observe the practitioner during the visit if needed, and we call that modeling. But if we're going to do modeling, we want to make sure it's very intentional and purposeful. We don't go in and just work with the child and hope that the parent or the caregiver or the teacher in the child care program is watching us and learning from it. We're very intentional. Modeling is very short. It takes just a very few minutes, and then we turn the activity and the child back over to the caregiver. Action practice goes hand in hand with observation. So if I'm watching, then I'm watching the parent or the caregiver practice what it is that they're learning to do to support the child's communication or movement, whatever our outcomes might be, ability to eat their meal within the context of that activity. So I'm observing, they're in action, or I could be demonstrating and they're watching me and learning from what it is that I'm doing and I'm talking about. Reflection is what causes coaching to be different from a lot of other adult learning strategies. And reflection is when we ask the person we're coaching to think about what it is that they already know. What have they already tried? Typically, families have tried a number of different things to get their child to, and you fill in the blank, eat or walk or talk or be able to get dressed in the morning. And so what have they already tried? It might be what worked, what didn't work. It could be what other ideas do they have. So we use different types of questions to find out from them, because if we can find out what their ideas are and join them in using their ideas, more likely to happen, rather than just making suggestions or we being the only ones who are going to give ideas and share ideas with the family. So we're going to ask them what it is that they know. We're going to ask them to go deeper and analyze why it's working or why it's not working. And then we're going to help them come up with other alternatives. And then we're going to ask them questions to get to the plan. Now, all those questions don't happen all in a row because there's going to be times for observation and practice in between. We may also share feedback. So we may share additional information or ideas. If they don't know what to do, then we typically have a lot of ideas and things that we could try. We want to make sure we affirm their knowledge and their understanding and their actions that they're taking place. And that we provide positive evaluative feedback whenever that might be warranted or needed. So these are the 5 characteristics that we use in combination in order for coaching to be what the research tells us that it can be and to get to those positive outcomes. Now, M'Lisa, you know we get a lot of questions about coaching and how coaching works. What would you say is one of our top questions that we get?
I think anecdotally, I think when we were kind of thinking about this, Dathan, we were like, hands down, the idea really is that people think there are just some situations where coaching won't work. There are some families because of family characteristics or children because of child characteristics that people say, yeah, I can see how coaching might work with, and then fill in the blank, but I don't see how it could work in this circumstance. Would you agree? I think when we hear that question,
I would.
We contemplate right away what is the person that. Go ahead. We really contemplate, like, what is the person's understanding of the use of all of the characteristics of coaching, and really think about the ability of that individual to inwardly look at how they're using coaching, and is coaching being implemented with fidelity. Because I think as Dathan and I started getting more skilled at coaching, we realized when we weren't successful with a particular situation, the best place to look was at ourselves about what we might be able to do differently. I think the other side of that too is we still have people, when they're asking us that question, they kind of compartmentalize and think of coaching as a service delivery approach versus direct therapy or real therapy. And that's always a red flag for us, because as Dathan started us out, coaching is the way we interact, and we can provide skilled interventions absolutely using coaching. What would you add, Dathan?
I think you're right on there. What about, we often get the question along these lines that people feel that it may not work for children with severe disabilities, especially severe physical disabilities, or maybe children with autism. What are your thoughts about how we answer that?
Yeah, so we do hear that a lot, and I think, again, the idea is, what is it that we would do instead of coaching? Because the supports that we would provide parents or teachers around how we would engage children with any diagnosis has to really be based on that child's ability to participate successfully in all routines and activities, and think about how that child can experience what he or she might be interested in. And I always worry, like, especially when it's children with severe and multiple disabilities, that people are thinking about more traditional types of interventions like stretching or positioning or that kind of thing. And we know that supporting a child's position so that child can be engaged in whatever's happening is critical. But the days of the therapist with the child or practitioner with the child are really limiting what that child can do when we're not around. And so the focus being on parents being confident and understanding how to maximize those opportunities is where we get all the practice. And so coaching would definitely be the way that I would interact with those family members and teachers, other caregivers, so that everybody involved with that child would know how to do that.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for that, M'Lisa. And we know we're going to be answering questions from the participants here in just a few minutes. So go ahead.
No, it's all right. Go ahead.
So if you haven't already, go ahead and type your question in. And when we get to that section, we'll be ready to. So when we go ahead and type your questions in, and when we get to that section here in the webinar, we'll be answering those for you. Since over the last 6 months, we have received questions literally from around the world, early intervention practitioners from around the world who have been asking us, how do I use coaching? Or how can I learn coaching? Or those of you who follow different groups on Facebook or other social media, different early intervention groups, you may have seen a flurry of activity in March and early April as early intervention practitioners were shifting their practice from face-to-face visits to televisits or to tele-intervention. And people were trying to figure out, what do we do? Because if we were doing more hands-on and we were working directly with the child, now that we're in a virtual format on the web, we can't really expect the parent to put the baby or that infant, the toddler, up in front of the video camera in order for us to work with the child. So what do? And people were scrambling to learn how to use a coaching interaction style. And so we wanted to share just a few of our, what we call our tele-tips. So things that you can do during your online visits with families during this time and still be coaching. So can you use coaching online? Can you use coaching in this type of a virtual format? And the answer to that overwhelmingly is yes. And in fact, we need to use coaching as our interaction style to build the competence and confidence of the caregiver to know what to do to support the child's learning. And so we have just a few tips that we want to share with you. One is you need to make sure that you have a real life activity setting as the focus and the content for your visit. And so we want to make sure that we're joining the family as a part of their meal time, or it could be, if they have playtime, it could be playtime. It could be going outside and swinging on the swings. It could be a trip to the park. It could be changing clothes, getting ready to go down for a nap, reading a book, whatever it is that families are doing with their children these days. And we know that with all the children home, there are a lot of different things going on. So we use those real life activities. We can't just wing it. We're not going to go in and work with the child, obviously, when we're in this kind of a format. So have your real life routine and have some backup plans for what happens next after that activity. We need to be planful. So we need to plan some things as we enter into the televisit. We need to plan, in addition to the activity setting, for example, where's the parent going to put the phone, or is going to put the iPad or the tablet or the computer, so that you're able to see the interaction. If you're going to do a bath time visit, where are they going to put that? Where are they going to prop it? What's that going to look like? Because we need to be able to see the visit, see what's happening. We need to make sure that that they know what the activity is. They know what it is that we need to see, so that when we're ready to start, we can really hit go, and we're ready to go for it. We want to make sure that the parent knows and understands that we want the camera turned to the activity, the caregiver and the child engaged in the activity. Now, when most of us use our phones or use a tablet to communicate with another person, the camera is on us. And so we're used to this one-on-one communication with the other person. But now we want to really shift that focus to the activity. And sometimes we can do that with just the open mic on the tablet or on the camera. At other times, it's going to be helpful for the care provider to have an earphone in, so the child is not distracted by the device. And so we're then kind of like the bug in the ear, CIA agent, coaching the family and supporting the family member or teacher within the context of the activity. So camera on the activity. We know that we need to slow down a little bit. We need to really ask just one question at a time. And just like we're experiencing some delays with our technology today, there are delays when you're doing your televisit, aren't there? And so if we don't wait and watch, so take the time to wait and watch, see what's happening. Sometimes we're uncomfortable with silence, but just sit back, watch the action, allow the parent and the child to play it out, and then prompt with one reflective question at a time. If you don't see something or you think you've missed it, ask the caregiver to show you what it is that they're trying, or show you what it is that you think that you missed. Ask them what it was that they did in that moment that they thought was or wasn't as successful as it could be. And what caregivers, parents are telling us in these types of interactions is, you know, I never would have thought about that. I never would have looked at that situation in that way. I never would have stopped and taken a moment had you not said it. So the caregivers are literally becoming our eyes, our ears, and our hands within the context of these interventions. The feedback that we and others are getting from across the country, from families, when we're really using the coaching practices is, you know what, I can do this. I know what to do now. My child's making progress like never before, because I don't just do this during the visit, but I do this all the time. So think about how much practice the caregiver and the child are getting doing what it is that they want to do to support their child's learning within and across all these everyday life routines that they're able to practice in. So ask the caregiver to show you. Wait and watch. Ask the one question at a time. Where we are getting a lot of questions about modeling. Can we still model? Is it okay to still show? How do we do that? Because we're not there with the child. And it's absolutely okay to model if you need to, if that matches the learning style of the adult that you're coaching, if that would be helpful to them. To other adults, having you show, it's really not that helpful because they're auditory learners, or because they just need to get in there and try it. But if you need to show them something, then you can use some of the common objects that you have around your house or the location where you're doing your televisit from. Many of you, I'm sure, are using dolls to show family members or other care providers how to position the child, how to hold the child, how to do hand over hand and move the child. Parents are telling us that's very helpful, but it's even more helpful than it was before, because instead of us doing it, they have to do it. And so they're finding tremendous success by them being the ones in the lead, our supporting them as they're moving through these daily activities, and then seeing their practice in between these visits when we're not there. We also wanted to share some other resources with you that we've been developing. So the Family Infant and Preschool program, where I serve as director, has developed a number of coaching resources that are available at this URL, which is in your handout packet. And you can go there and you can see a video of what a televisit might look like and see how that compares to your televisits. There are also infographics, which are one-page instructional tools that you can use on telecoaching. And for example, there's one on alternatives to modeling. So what can you do rather than your traditional modeling? There's one we call FIP tips, for just different tips for how to conduct your televisits and make them more effective. There's one on the 5 characteristics of coaching and how you operationalize those characteristics when you are working via a televisit platform like this. There is one on different resources for observation. You know, some families don't have access to video, so they're using phone calls for their visits, but we still need the characteristic of observation. So they're using video. So some families, if they can't show you what it looks like during the visit, or because you're on the phone, then they are sending video or posting video for practitioners to look at, and then they reflect on that during the visit. So what we're finding is we're getting really creative with how we're coaching and how we're supporting families during this time. And I think this time is showing us how creative we can be and still hold true to the practices, but ensure that families and children are getting the supports that they need to promote their child's learning and development. There's also a number of coaching resources on the Family Infant and Preschool Program website at fipp.org. fipp.org. And it includes some tips and techniques that M'Lisa and I developed, just a couple of pages of information. There are coaching questions, so there are reflective question examples there. And then there's a coaching practices rating scale. So you can actually rate yourself in terms of how are you fully operationalizing the characteristics of coaching in your practice, in your televisits right now, or when you have the opportunity to do face-to-face again. M'Lisa, speaking of Fidelity, practicing with Fidelity, I believe you have a Fidelity challenge for the participants who are listening in today.
I do. One of the things we wanted you to lead with today, and I know we still have some time for questions and answering those, but we wanted you, after you have your coaching interactions, the self-reflection we challenge you to use is to think about, what did the person learn as a result of your coaching interaction? And then there's a part 2, and how do you know? So what did the person learn as a result of your coaching interaction, and how do you know what they learned? So we know you're having multiple opportunities to use coaching. And again, many of you have been doing this for a while, and some of you are likely new, but that's a great question to put in your toolkit for your own self-assessment. Especially, I don't know about you guys, but most people we talk to are feeling a little bit more isolated than usual. And so when you're not getting that feedback from your colleagues, or you don't have access to them really easily, that's a great question to ask yourself. Of course, I ask myself out loud questions all the time because I talk all the time. But the idea of once you have that interaction and be concrete with yourself. And we're not only having you ask that question because we worry that something might not be going well, it's because what's going well. So how do you know? So the challenge is, what did the person learn as a result of the coaching interaction, and how do you know? So Dathan, I'm excited to get to their questions. I hope they have some, because we want to hear them. So I think Daniel and Amy are there to help us monitor those.
Yes, well, thank you, first of all, for excellent presentation. We did get tons of questions, so I'm going to try my best to work through these. And I'm going to kind of combine a few questions just to kind of cover a few bases at once. So we did get a handful of listeners that were asking about buy-in and how can you increase trust, especially with other educators. So I guess how can you introduce what coaching is to them, and how can you kind of increase the engagement that those other professionals that you would be working with can do when you're coaching them?
Okay, that's a really good question, and it reminds me too, we added in the second edition, we added a lot more information about how to explain coaching. For those of you that might be familiar with the teaming handbook, we had a pretty extensive section on explaining in there, but we didn't have that in the coaching handbook. So we added that. So if you're looking for some reading material to think about how I might explain this, it surprises people, I think, sometimes. Daniel, Dathan and I don't do a lot of, I'm going to be using coaching and this is why, and we do that. But it's more conversational, where we might say, I'm going to be asking you a lot of questions because it really helps me find out what you know or what you've been thinking about. But we don't make a big production that it's coaching versus something else that we might have done. But the trust factor is absolutely huge. And as I mentioned earlier today, that's one of the key characteristics of an effective coach. Dathan and I have found, tried and true over the years, that being honest, open, and patient with people, and number one, working on their priorities. If we focus on something that is important to the person that we're coaching, we are likely going to have the opportunity to coach about things that we think are important too, that they might not realize yet or they might not know about. But we say 100 times, meet people where they are and start there and focus on those priorities. And just one more tidbit that I'll add before the next question. The pace at which you coach could likely be slowed down. We have a tendency to want to go quick. We see a lot of things that need to happen. We want to get to all the different topics, and that was really, for me, Dathan was always very skilled at having a good pace. But I was always wanting to share too much or go too quickly. And so you get to know people better when you really slow down and focus on them and what their priorities are, which is a trust builder for sure.
So kind of following up with that, I guess kind of the inverse, we've had several listeners also asking, how do you get buy-in from parents as well? So parents may say things like, I don't know, and you're the expert. So how can you engage with parents and get them to also buy into the coaching methods?
All right, so with family members, one of the things we want to acknowledge is, yes, we have a lot of ideas. We have experience in working with a lot of different families, but no one knows your child and your family better than you do. And so we're going to be partners in this process. And what we know is that the way young children learn is by being a part of these activities. We don't just wake up one day and say, okay, today I'm going to teach my child how to walk. What we do is we provide opportunities for the child to be up and to be more mobile. And the same thing with talking and other skills that are important to us and important to the children. And so we learn and we give opportunities through these everyday activities. And so we want to support families in knowing what to do in those important activities of their everyday life. And instead of me being the one to teach the child to do it, what research tells us is that it is incredibly more powerful to the child's learning if it happens with an important adult in the child's life. So the parent, the grandparent who's a primary caregiver, the child care provider. And so my job then is to use what I know to support them. And if I'm talking to the parent, to support you in knowing what to do in these moments to get the most out of it, to accomplish the goals and outcomes that you want for your child that are written on your individualized family service plan, the IFSP. And so I'm equipped to help you to be able to do that. And then when I'm not here, the cool thing is going to be, you're going to know what to do with your child during all those other activities that you have to do. And your child's going to be learning and developing by you doing that with him or with her.
Great. Also, just a quick note, I know we are experiencing some audio delays, I think just because of the attendance numbers. So I apologize to the audience, but we can't avoid the audio issues. Let's see. We have a few listeners, or several listeners. I know you offered some teletips for coaching, but we have several listeners that were asking questions like, do you have any suggestions for families that are failing to follow up or failing to implement any agreed upon strategies? So in a virtual setting, do you have any tips or suggestions for engaging with these families and supporting them and getting them to continue with follow-up and implementing strategies that have been agreed upon?
Yeah, I think that I'm not really sure that the difference in virtual or face-to-face really plays out as much here, because our go-to would be that we would circle back to, are you using a real life routine or activity setting that the family would be doing at that time of day if you weren't there? Dathan and I talk to a lot of people almost every day about coaching. And the idea is that trying to establish, let's read a book while we do our coaching session, or let's do a puzzle. The squeaky toy slipped in here somehow. Sorry about that, my dog. It's not something that they regularly do, so our coaching cannot be as effective if it's around something that they really know how to do, and they can't engage in the same way they would if they had some idea of what to do. So we often hear the same people who say we can't get parents to engage or buy in. I can't get them off the couch. I can't get them down on the floor. Those are red flags to us. Is that, do they do that when we're not around? And we can work on being playful during diaper change or playful during snack time with the caregiver versus let's do structured play. And if the follow through hasn't happened, so it sounds good, sounds like you're starting reviewing your joint plan. If the follow through hasn't happened, then let's talk about it. Tell me more about why that didn't work out. And sometimes it's, life got crazy and we didn't have time. But sometimes they might say, if they're saying things to you like, well, I couldn't remember to try it, or we didn't have time to do it, ooh, we really go, ooh. Well, if I'm using a real life routine or something that you're already doing, time shouldn't be the issue. So that's a good self-check for us. Are we really doing something? Versus, I often say, like I was the event during the visit. So I wanted to do an activity that was when I would be there. And that's backwards. It should be, I'm there to help them do the things they.
Let's see. We have a listener that was asking, would coaching be appropriate in a lead teacher and teacher assistant relationship? For example, this listener says they may notice that the assistant is raising her voice to children often.
That's one of the really nice things about coaching, is that coaching can be used really anytime we want to support the learning of another individual. It's so fun and interesting to us whenever we do a 2-day training, for example, someplace. On the beginning of the second day, a lot of people will want to share how they used coaching with their teenage children the evening between the 2 training days, or how they used coaching with their spouse, who would, it's taken two weeks to try to get their spouse to move a chair from one room to another room, and they nagged and nagged and nagged, and they brought it up all the time, and the chair never got moved. But they started using these strategies, and voila, the chair was moved that very evening. And so she was testifying the next day about how well coaching worked. So coaching will work in these instances, and it can work beautifully with a teacher and an assistant teacher. So and let's just go with that example that was provided. So if the teacher hears the assistant raising her voice with the children, then that's a great opportunity for coaching. Now we got to pick our timing about when we're going to do that, and when and how we're going to have the conversation. But that's an observation that the coach, the lead teacher, is making of the assistant. And so shortly after that moment, in close proximity, the lead teacher might ask the assistant teacher. Now, one of the things that we had been talking about that we're working on is supporting the children in our classroom to be able to transition smoothly from one activity or one center to another. How do you think it worked this morning, right before snack time, as they were transitioning out of their centers over to snack? And then the assistant teacher might say, well, I don't think it worked too well, because I had to call several children over because they didn't want to leave the activity. And so the lead teacher might say, I noticed that too. So how well did your calling them, how well did that work? Well, I don't think it worked too well at all. And then they can go deeper and explore that. Well, why do you think it didn't work? Well, because I even raised my voice and it didn't help. Yeah, I know, I heard that too. So how does that match some of the things that we've talked about for supporting children from moving from, especially when it's the activities they really like, over to the snack time? And so there's an analysis question, helping that teacher to compare. So, and then moving it to a plan. So what ideas do you have of what we could do the next time that happens to make it like you want it, make it even more effective? And so immediately they've got a plan around it. And that conversation can take less than 5 minutes to engage the other person and get a plan for how they're going to do something differently. So yes, early intervention practitioners can coach childcare providers and teachers. Teachers can coach assistant teachers. Teachers can support parents. Early intervention practitioners can support parents. Coaching is beneficial to all of us. We all need a peer or someone who's supporting us in continuing our learning and our growth.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. We have excuse me, we have a listener that was asking, during the reflection visit, is it too vague to ask, how do you think the observation went? Or do you have a suggestion for a better way to ask this?
We do have a suggestion, and we often, especially when we're working with mentor coaches or master coaches, I tease them and I say, don't ever say, how did that go? Or how do you think it went? That's an awareness question. And we would really want to ask more of an analysis question. So how well do you think that strategy worked? Or what do you think changed with mealtime because we tried the strategy we tried? Or I'll build on Dathan's scenario. Well, I noticed you did use the softer voice. How did that compare with when you were having trouble doing that? So that we can have them evaluate and analyze what was different. Adding the word well is probably the easiest. How well did that work? Or what changed? Or what was different that time? Starting there versus how did it go?
Let's see. I know we've gotten several listeners who are asking questions kind of along these lines. Do you have any recommendations for helping coaches? Oops, I'm reading the wrong one. Do you have any recommendations for coaches that are experiencing pushback? Either their colleagues are resistant to coaching, or their colleagues feel that they don't need coaching. So professionals that are experiencing some sort of resistance in trying to implement coaching models.
That we know that can happen, and so sometimes our colleagues aren't as enthusiastic about coaching practices as we might be, and so we just engage in a conversation around it. So what do you know about coaching? When I talk about coaching, what does that mean to you? Or what are you thinking whenever I talk about that? We want to make sure that we're on the same page, that we're both of the same in the same understanding. Now, they may feel like they need to be more directly involved with the child. They may feel like that if they use coaching, that they can't. A lot of people will say, well, I can't put my hands on the child anymore. All I can do is just talk to the caregiver. And we really want to take a step back with them and think about that. Because one of the 10 key elements that we wrote about in the book is that coaching is as hands-on as it needs to be. And so we want to find out what's the reason why you feel like you need to put your hands on the child. Well, I just need to give the child a good workout when I'm visiting them, when I have my visits. And we would say, okay, so what is it that the parent's learning to do related to that when you're not there? So, or how often do you go? Well, I go one time a week. Well, how effective would that be? The child getting that good workout one time a week, how often does it really need to happen? How often does the child need to be moving and grooving when you're not there? Well, it needs to happen every day. It needs to happen throughout the day. Hey, how do you think coaching and supporting the parent using their real life activities might assist with ensuring that this is happening more than just when you're there? So we want to meet them where they are, find out what it is that they believe are the reasons why it can't work. And oftentimes it's misperceptions. And we've woven in some of the most common misperceptions. We've woven that into the book as well. So we make sure we answer questions and address some of those common misperceptions and actually provide you with responses and answers to some of those common misperceptions so that you have information that you can share. But join them where they are, help determine whether it's a misperception. If so, help them clarify it. If it's that they're not sure what to do and how this would work, then invite them into a coaching conversation or a coaching relationship with you to provide the support and to help them to get to the outcomes that they're wanting. Anytime we're coaching somebody, we've got to look at it from the perspective of what's in it for them. So when I'm going to coach a child care provider in early intervention, I got to think what's in it for that child care provider, for me to be a part of that classroom or be in that classroom. I can't be disruptive. I can't be a distraction, but I certainly can't take the child out in the hall and just do my thing with the child, because that's going to help in the moment perhaps, but it's not going to help as soon as I take the child back into the classroom, because the teacher isn't going to know what to do. So I got to think about how I join with them, how I start with where they are and then assist them in getting the outcomes that they're wanting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's see. We have a listener who says many of the families that they serve only have a cell phone for sessions. And so I know you covered a little bit of this in your presentation, but do you have any tips for helping families to position the phone so that the child isn't so attracted to grabbing the phone, and so that, but they can still see what the child is doing while they're trying out activities?
Well, it's not uncommon for families to be using just their cell phone for these televisits. That's what is the most available resource. And I tell you what, we are thankful for them, that families have access, and not all families do. So that's one of those planning conversations that we're going to have. So, because some families will say, I just don't think this is going to work because he's too distracted by the cell phone. If the cell phone goes on, then he thinks he's got to talk on it. He thinks it's his grandma, and so he wants to get on it and talk to grandma, or he wants to go make faces into it. So then we've got to talk about, okay, well, where could we position the phone so we're still going to be able to hear and see, but so that it's not going to be distracting for him. We are also going to talk about, let's think about the activity that we're going to use, and let's think about his interests and things that he likes, and how can we have him be engaged in activities that are more interesting to him than the cell phone would be. So if he's really doing something that he really likes to do, then his attention can't be drawn totally to the cell phone, because he's more engaged in the activity. And that's also where we've used successfully, as have quite a few researchers, where they've used the earphone, or one earphone, for the cell phone. And so the parent then positions the cell phone, or has the cell phone available, but in a position so that the child can't hear you talking. Only the parent's hearing through that earphone. So the audio is not distracting to the child. We've got the child engaged in the activity. We're communicating to the parent or the teacher through the earphone. And so it significantly decreases the problems with that. But we talk about things about, how can we put it up on a bookcase? How can we use a bookcase? How can we position it on the counter? What can we lean it up against? But that's one of those planning conversations that we want to make sure we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, I think we're getting close to our time here. So we'll just take one more question. So do you have any tips or strategies for professionals to convince either families or other professionals of the strengths that they already possess?
I think probably the tip would be, we might align the word convincing with coaxing, to try to talk somebody into something. And I'm pretty self-assured, and I can talk, as much or as long as needed, but I'm not sure I've ever convinced anybody of anything. And so we didn't really have, it really wasn't the purpose for today, but reading more and thinking more about capacity building is probably the best tip that we could give. That giving the person a chance to assess and think about what it is that person is doing that's making the difference. So I often give this as an example. Let's say the parent is clearly excited about something that the child's doing. So the parent says, oh my goodness, you won't believe he's just feeding himself all kinds of things now, and he's chewing them up and trying his best to swallow them. And I know that this is something that the parent has really been wanting to have happen. Try to refrain. Now I'm going to have a happy and excited face, but try to refrain from saying, that is great, and say something, again with excitement, say instead, what did you do to make that happen? And wait, and be prepared, because they may, oh, he was just ready. Well, wait, let's say, what did you specifically do right before he did that? Well, like you said, I just put a couple of goldfish out on the tray, and I didn't talk to him about feeding himself, and he tried to reach, and I just helped with his elbow, and he put it in his mouth. And then after that, he got the idea. Okay, what does that tell you about what you did? So see how I'm excited. They clearly know I'm thrilled that this is happening, but instead of me getting the praise, we're exercising this opportunity for them to analyze, wow, I did make that happen, and I did do that. And then what we see happen is they want to try and do it more. The parent will be more confident and try more, and then they might even say, you know, I decided to go ahead and put the yogurt out there, and I gave him the spoon, and I just wanted to see what would happen, to see how they stick their neck out a little bit more or feel a little braver to try something new, versus me having to push. But, you know, arm in arm, side by side, we can support that happening together.
Great, thank you. Sorry, my dog is barking. Okay, so I think I know there's many questions that we didn't get to. So if we didn't get to your question, we will follow up with you after this webinar. But just a few quick reminders. There's a survey that you'll be prompted to complete at the end of this webinar. So if you complete that, again, you'll be entered to win a free book. And after that, I believe we have our discount offer. So all of our viewers today can save 20% on your Brooks Publishing orders just using code COFFEECHAT during checkout. And you can order those at brookspublishing.com. And this code is valid through January 31st of next year. If you would like additional professional development opportunities, I know that link is a little hard to see there. We have tons of other pre-recorded and upcoming coffee chats, and you can find those at our bit.ly on the screen, and I'll just send this in the chat. And then we also have, sorry, I'm typing and talking at the same time. We also have COVID-19 resources that we've put together, including recommended reading, downloadable resources, professional development webinars. We've all put together to help early childhood educators and professionals get through this pandemic and work virtually. And you can find those at this shortened URL on your screen as well. And for certificates, there's a certificate for download in your handouts section that you can download now, or you can go to this URL on your screen. You can also download the slide handouts as well from the handouts section. And if you don't get a chance to do either of those, you will also receive a follow-up email tomorrow that will have a link to your certificate if you're watching this live, and if you're watching a recording, then you can access via this URL on your screen. And so with that, I'd like to say thank you to all our viewers, and a big, big thank you again to M'Lisa and Dathan for this fantastic presentation. It was really, really, really great. All right. Well, thank you again, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.